All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out to the Portland Psychedelic Society at the Clinton Street Theater. We are a Find the Others community that is here to facilitate finding common ground in the psychedelic renaissance and bridging gaps and bridging communities and knitting folks together. Bringing us our knowledge together and sharing this knowledge. And so you'll find events like tonight's happening to welcome you into our community. And we hope that you'll bring all of your questions, even those that you were afraid to ask about psychedelics, to our discussion tonight. I'll be wandering around with the mic and taking your questions while our experts answer. I'm Charles. I'm one of the volunteers here at the Portland Psychedelic Society. And we are a volunteer-powered group that works here in Portland to bring conversations about psychedelics to the people. So thank you for being a part of our work. Coming up this week, we have more events to illuminate you on your path. Tomorrow, we have Psychedelics and Animal Reiki at Awakenings Wellness Center. So that's here on the east side and sounds utterly fascinating. On Friday, June 14th, we've got a book discussion group, How to Change Your Mind. How many here have read Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind? About half of you, which is excellent. So you can find others who have read the book and want to share their experiences and insights into it. So that is coming up on Friday, June 14th at Flanders House. On Saturday, over on the west side, we have a talk, What Defines a Psychedelic Drug? And on Monday, June 24th, we have Is Microdosing Placebo, the self-blinding microdose study. When Joe talks about this, did I hear no? Excellent. When Joe talks this evening, he can also talk to the group that he's leading on July 3rd for healthcare professionals and psychedelics. And then finally on July 9th, we're going to all be back here at the Clinton Street Theater for a night of psychedelic art and artists. So please do join us in this community. Please do be a part of it. And please use this time tonight to look into yourself, your own practice, the things that you want to know, the things that you want to share, and understand that this is a place of no judgment and community. So thank you all for being here, and can you give each other a round of applause for being part of this scene? So tonight, it's my pleasure to share the dais with some of our board members, and I would like to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, introduce their relationship to the medicines, and what they are able to share with you this evening. So I'll start here with Valis.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Valis Sim. Some of you might have been here when I gave a talk a couple of months ago about psychedelics and technology and creativity, and I work in healthcare, so I'm a clinical chemist. I work with AI robotics, and I work a lot in the cloud. So what I do with AI is get it to dispense formulary in hospital pharmacies. I'm a full-spectrum chemist, so I work with medicine as a medicine person, and I also work in hospital systems. And I'm the president of the board. So welcome.
Thank you, Valis. I'm glad you can be here tonight. I'm glad to be here tonight. I'm glad we all are. It's nice to be a part of community. My name is Elizabeth Price. I'm trained as a counselor. I have 20-plus years in the field, and I work with psychonauts in my private practice as they use entheogens for their well-being. I also have 15 years of doing crisis work here in the city, and I am sitting next to my clinical supervisor here to my right, Joseph Eaton.
How did you describe yourself? You work with psychonauts?
I work with psychonauts who use entheogens.
What she said. Because these substances are all legal, sometimes we fudge what's going on a little bit, and so that's what's happening with this particular thing. So I'm Joe Eaton. I am recently retired from 37 years as a counselor. 15 or 16 of them with this individual at a psychiatric urgent walk-in clinic. And I work with psychonauts as well. Leave that as it were. So I have some expertise and some experience, and looking forward to sharing it.
So I'd like to ask the audience to start formulating your questions, start thinking about the stuff that you want to know. But while you're formulating that, I'd like to start by asking our panel, this isn't Ask Me Anything, but in this community, as Joe pointed out, where we're talking about Schedule I substances, what are the things one should never ask?
Oh, this is Elizabeth's favorite.
Drum roll, please. So, Portland Psychedelic Society is an educational community. This is not a place, please, to come and seek substances. Okay, these venues should not be the place for us to do that. Okay, but please make friends, have conversations, gather outside of these events, make merry, make community.
Elizabeth, I just wanted to add that you didn't say anything about your role with PPS as our new ombuds.
Oh, hi. I am also short-term temporary new member of the board, but now we are in the position of creating an ombudsperson position. This would be a public advocate, so kind of an intermediary or a mediator between community and our board, and so that we can continue to shape this community as owners of this, all of us. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Outstanding. So we've established the roles of PPS, but what about outside of PPS? What's some good etiquette to bear in mind when you're, say, have a trusted supplier or are doing your work? How should one be discreet? What are some things what are some boundaries one should draw around their practice to be safe?
You're talking about a personal practice?
Correct.
Got it. Well, you've got two sets of risks to consider as I see it. You've got the legal risks, and you've got the risks of bringing something into your body, any psychedelic of any variety. So certainly, what I most often see people in my private practice with are people who are choosing to work with psilocybin. And if you want to talk about what the safest methodology for them to know what they are bringing into their body, it is for them to have a personal relationship with where they found that source, or maybe even doing something like finding it themselves, if you will. Okay? That is, however, leaving people at enormous legal risk right now. I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but there is a ballot initiative called Psy 2020 that would basically stop penalizing. It would be a ticket. It would not be a criminal offense. There would be no jail time. You wouldn't have to report it to your employers if you were to cultivate your own or if you were to wild harvest. And what I appreciate about that initiative is that it continues to give access to people, not just inside a Western medical model, which is kind of the mainstay of this initiative, is to give a traditional best outcome approach to using psychedelics, specifically psilocybin, in a therapeutic purpose with licensed providers.
I can add something to that, and that has to do with the legal opportunities for using certain plant-based medicines. So as a member and a medicine carrier of the Native American Church, I have a legal designation where I can carry and dispense several plant medicines, most readily peyote, psilocybin, and wachuma, so San Pedro. And if I have a circle, I can carry those medicines legally as long as I purchase them from a Native American Church source. And then if someone, say, comes to partake in a circle, they would need to get a medicine card. And it's just a little card that says, yes, you are a member. It has nothing to do with the church as we normally think about it. We're just using this as a legal designation. And there are certain ethics that go along with that and certain guidelines that go along with it. And if someone wants to subscribe to those things, then our circle is being done in a legal way. It's similar to Santo Daime, and I can't speak exactly to Santo Daime because I'm not a member, but I have attended some of their ceremonies, and they have a legal designation as well. There are some other groups with specific medicines that are following suit, and they are setting up their organizations in such a way that their sacraments fall under legal designation. That said, there are certain medicines that if I worked with them, just saying, they would not be protected. But those plant medicines that I mentioned are.
Thank you. So, in summary, Portland Psychedelic Society is an educational society. So, this is where you come to find the others and find the community, but not find the medicines. These are Schedule 1, so one should be discreet and careful, but there are certain exceptions, including the religious exception that Valis had mentioned here, as well as a variety of initiatives, including the Psy 2020 here in Portland and the very widely flouted decriminalization that's occurred in Denver and in Oakland. So that kind of lays the thou shalt not Old Testament legal stuff out of the way. Now let's go to some of your questions. So who have we got? Who's going to be brave and be the first to ask? Y'all came to and asked me anything. All right, 1 second.
So we have all these new psychedelic laws. We saw decriminalization happen recently in Oakland and Denver just a few weeks before that. But do you guys feel that there's any damage that could be caused by the way that these laws are being handled as opposed to just like the celebration that we're having of any kind of acceptance? Is there going to be a downside to the way these laws are being written and the substances are being handled legally now?
Well, just to clarify, it's actually not decriminalization. What they've done is said that for plant medicines, it'll be the lowest priority for the city police to enforce. And in both places, it has nothing to do with state or federal. So we're still in that quagmire. Part of the problem is that because we're a 501(c), we're not supposed to be involved in political things. So I'm not. I'll look to you to stop me if I'm going over into dangerous territory. You look at what happened with pot, and I think, it's wonderful people aren't being arrested, and you can get whatever pot you want, but there's also this huge bureaucracy and that's sitting on top of it, and now there's all this bureaucracy is panicked because there's too much pot around, and is there? You got stopped by feds in California, right? It's pretty weird. We don't have, none of us have a good sense of how dangerous this situation is, how liable we are to get in trouble with the law. We are all just making guesses based on almost no good information. Having said that, I haven't heard of anybody who's been busted for plant medicines in this area. Maybe what we have now, I'm just thinking about it, is the best of all possible worlds. We don't have any bureaucracy on top of us. And where, we got to do secret handshakes, and, I've got to do a strip search of all my clients to make sure they're not carrying a mic. That's a joke. It's a joke, really, it's a joke. But in some ways, this may be the best of all possible worlds now, where nobody really none of the authorities seem to give a flying fandango about what we're doing, as long as we're sotto voce, as long as we're quiet about what we're doing. I'm incredibly ambivalent about all of these. Although I really do like the just making it the lowest priority for the police. That actually seems like it won't upset the right wing and essentially gets people off our back.
It makes it more functionally legal, not literally legal, but. And so the way that I have established my practice inside the addiction models here in the United States, most people are oriented to an abstinence-only perspective, but there is another perspective, and that's the perspective of harm reduction. And that acknowledges that maybe not all drugs are bad and that we have cognitive liberty. And that what I saw happening was there's this psychedelic renaissance going on. There are a lot of very intelligent people here in Portland who are following this research and guinea pigging on themselves and doing 15 years of crisis work and having a more than 25-year personal relationship with psychedelics. I know a good tool when I see it, and I understand why people were wanting to use it therapeutically. I wanted to join them in a harm reduction commitment that first and foremost, they've decided to do this on their own. I'm not proselytizing. I'm not convincing anybody. They've convinced me that they're hell-bent with or without me. And if I were to join them, what we raise is the bar of safety, first and foremost. And being that I'm 20-plus years in the field as a counselor, if we also raise the bar of potency, gosh, couldn't help that.
I actually have a few things I want to say to your point, and that is I do have concerns related to your question, and I think that if you're doing things on the low down and you have a few clients, that's fine. But when you start, having like big circles and, dozens of people, then you become more on the radar. And so to your point also about PPS being an educational group, we don't, come here and look for medicines or anything of that nature. Another concern I have is taking plant medicines that I personally use in a ceremonial manner and putting that into a clinical paradigm. I'm not sure where that leaves ceremonial plant medicines. So I have a concern it will be taken away.
Does everybody in the audience get the difference between the ceremonial and the therapeutic? Does anybody not? Yeah. For those who don't, you could briefly describe the difference.
Sure. Well, I could speak to you, say, from the Native American Church perspective, and that is that these plant medicines are held as sacred medicines. They're taken typically in a group, preferably outside, but not always, to connect with oneself and one's spirit and to tap into the energy that connects us all. And also being used as a way to process internal issues you might want to work through. So some people might come with PTSD or addictions, similar to how they might present in a clinical setting. But instead of going through clinical channels, we're going through the support of the community, more of a peer setting, and in a context of the Native American Church. So I work mostly in the Lakota tradition, and so we use sweat lodge and different medicines. And during that time, we might have certain elders or a chief come in and work with individuals with the medicine. We hold pipe ceremony and all of those sorts of things. That's different from doing things in a clinical setting. So I'll let those two on my right talk about the clinical piece.
So, one of the amazing things about all of these medicines is that they seem to work on a number of different levels. And one of the key points for, I'm forgetting which medicine and what illness it was supposed to treat, but the effectiveness of the treatment was positively related to how cosmic it got, for use of a non-clinical term. That the unitary experience is the word that is the phrase that we use to describe when your ego either dissolves or diminishes significantly, and you have a sense of joining with the whole universe. And there is some evidence that experience is a critical part of the therapy that the medicine does. And so I personally work in what I call a psycho-spiritual framework. And so I let the client tell me, Sacred Knowledge by Bill Richards, a very cool guy, very sweet man, very bright. He's actually going to be doing an all-day workshop at the Horizons conference in New York City in October. But the idea is that from where I'm sitting, people can have completely clinical goals or completely spiritual goals or amorphous goals, like the guy I talked to yesterday who just feels stuck and wants to get unstuck. Now, I'm interpreting that as a more spiritual kind of issue for him, and I'm going to come at it more from that standpoint. But I'm very worried about Psy 2020 because they are clearly using the marijuana initiative way of coming in through medicine, through the whole pharmacological madness that we're all in now. And I, from my point of view, I think we're in much more solid ground if we emphasize the spiritual end of things and say that this is the what's the federal law they changed? No
Religious Freedom Act.
The Religious Freedom Act and the Constitution both guarantee that you can use substances, especially plant substances, as sacraments in your spiritual development. And I personally think that that's a safer road for us to go. Also, it's broader. Going in through the medical model is fraught with all kinds of problems in my mind. Yeah.
It takes an individual's power away. So in my paradigm, I think it's preferable, rather than to prescribe something to someone, which I certainly can do, to have them go home, grow our own mushrooms, put our intentions into those plants, nurture them, and then journey with them and build a relationship with these plants, rather than just getting them dispensed to you by someone who, presumably knows better, which, they don't really. So does that answer your question?
Okay, I see an audience question here, so just give me a moment to get to you.
Okay, so I'm forgetting your names. Is it Elizabeth in the middle? Okay, so I have a question for you that other folks can chime in as well. So I'm just thinking about what you were explaining about being your practice and also your clinical history. So I'm assuming that you have an educational background as a professional, and I'm kind of curious if you could talk a little bit about how that transition worked for you, and if you held on to your professional connection. I don't know if you were connected to a board, and in your current practice, do you kind of dabble in both worlds, or? Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. So I'm taking advantage that Oregon is one of 3 states in the United States where we can practice as a professional counselor without a license. And I do this because that affords the clients that I work with on whatever subject deeper privacy, right? So the process was that I had actually become discontent with the board yet again in my life, because there's a strong prohibition against what we call dual relationships, which is me seeing anyone professionally that I have any prior knowledge of. Portland being what it is, small communities, people would say again and again, "Oh, you're a counselor, can I come see you?" And I would say, "I'm sorry, I can't because I know you." And they're like, "But that's why I wanted to see you, because I thought I knew you from this whatever community." And then a couple of months after I decided to break with the board, I had a personal calling. I felt very personally called by the experience of psilocybin. Very inspired. As I said earlier, I have a personal relationship. I also have a good sense of what tools look like. And for about maybe 30 seconds in my imagination, as I started connecting some dots, because I didn't know our psychiatric history, the history of psychiatric medicine, I thought perhaps I had thought of something on my own. And then I Googled, and then I was like, oh, that's what Timothy Leary was up to. And I started connecting dots, and I started realizing that I was standing in the company of people's minds who I deeply respect. And then I started to learn the history of psychiatric medicine, and I was astonished to learn that if you had spoken to a psychiatrist, let's say on the subject of alcohol addiction, in the 50s and 60s, they would have been talking to you about LSD. It was our sharpest tool. And I was formally educated. I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, and I knew nothing of this. What's up with that?
I knew about it.
I didn't. Texas educated, though, so that could be that.
So I guess to understand better, so you were happy with parting ways with your license, and do you continue to use your letters, so to speak, as part of your in your practice as a counselor?
Got it. So the way I explain myself to people is, so I have a master's degree in clinical psychology. I am a counselor. That is who I am. And that I join people in a coaching practice, because coaching, as Valis was pointing out, is kind of a alternative conversation to the Western model of pathology, which is that the client is sick and needs to be healed from an external source. I appreciate the point that you brought up about the limits inside the Western model. I'm very classically trained. The further and further I am in practice, the more alternative I become, the more unconventional I become. It's very much my personal experience, and it's also the experience that I've had witnessing what other people find inside psychedelics, that it brings us home to ourselves, and we are aware of our own innate programming to heal and be well. And that's what we're tapping into.
And on a broader sense, there are two different camps that are going on, two levels of approaching these medicines at this point. I just talked about the legal perils, but for people with licenses, a more significant peril is the boards. The boards are opposed to their members doing illegal things, and will take your license away, or can take your license away in a flash. There's very little protection for you from that. And if they take your license away, for most people, that means they no longer are able to make a living. And so there are many, many people with licenses at every level of the spectrum. And the ones, I know of one or two people with licenses who are doing it. I know of a whole lot more people with licenses who would be doing it, who aren't, because they're afraid of losing their license. And as an aside, just that we expect in the next month or two to have a clinic open here in Portland that will be treating people with PTSD diagnoses with MDMA. That'll be happening. It'll probably cost a chunk of change, and you must have failed it's part of the stage 3 trials, and so you must have had failed 2 other treatment modalities for PTSD.
We have 2 questions in front.
Yes, I thought it might be interesting to participate in a clinical trial. So when I looked into it, I found out 2 things that sort of eliminated that possibility for me. First, I have, at least in looking for a short time, it seems Oregon is not usually a participant in the clinical trials that are going on.
Correct.
And the second is they're limited to people 65 or younger. So can you comment on those things?
I wasn't aware of the 65 or younger. I'm surprised about that. Yeah, I mean, there aren't that many trials going on in the country. We still, even in the midst of this renaissance, there are, 10, 15 trials that I know of in America. There are more happening overseas. But, I mean, it still is very, very difficult to get permission to do research. We're still fundamentally in the dark ages.
I have a couple questions. The first is a comment. I was mentioning to Chris over here that I recently read an article in the Yoga Journal, and it was all about taking psychedelics to let go of the ego for spiritual enlightenment. And they talked about it doing so in controlled environments so that it was safe. And I don't know if this is a kosher question to ask, but I wondered if there were such environments here in Portland. And my second question is, I'm curious to know a little bit more about microdosing and the difference of the medicinal benefits of microdosing versus taking a different dose, particularly for things that perhaps are a little bit less severe, such as maybe anxiety or trauma or things of that nature.
So the first question was...
Secure setting.
Secure setting. So she just mentioned, too, Santa Daime and the Native American Church. I'm not aware... Well, there are ayahuasca groups and probably... I don't know. Do you know of any yoga groups? Have you heard of any?
Well, you're still on the setting question. So let's clear the setting question, and then let's move to microdosing.
Yeah, okay. I'm just not... certainly people offer to sit with folks. I'm not aware of any group or either spiritual or otherwise, other than a few ayahuasca groups that meet. So I guess the answer is no, I'm not aware of any.
So we're going to... Go ahead.
So I think what you're asking is about set and setting. Okay, so Santa Daime, they're using ayahuasca. You could certainly attend those ceremonies. There are ayahuasqueras. You can do that in the country, or you can go to another country to do that. And there are some organized trips that go there. Just be careful who you're signing up with. There is, certainly through NAC, Native American Church, if you have a medicine carrier who has that designation, you can be in a setting that's legally authorized, if you will. You can come to any of those circles. But within that context, any context, there is a sacred container developed. So in any of these, whether it's NAC or Santa Daime or wherever you go, you just want to make sure that there is a lot of effort and energy put into your safety and well-being. And if there isn't, you don't have to partake. Make sure that there's safety and that you're comfortable with it, that things are done in a good way, and you feel at ease with your set and setting. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and this is a good place. We're going to come back to the microdosing question, but this is a good place to ask Elizabeth, what's a sitter? What's a guide? Why should people choose them, and how are they different?
Thank you. I appreciate that question, Charles. So the difference between a sitter and a guide. The way I see a sitter is that this is someone who's ostensibly there for your physical safety, right? Good idea that maybe they take your vehicle keys if you drive, that you have an agreement that they are there to only direct you, boss you around, tell you to do something if it's a health and safety issue, and that the only way that they would ever, reach out and break, confidentiality is if there were something life-threatening happening in the immediate moment. So that a sitter is responsible for your physical safety. I see a guide as someone who is far more proficient in knowing psychedelics personally, clinically, and understands the nature of the therapeutic relationship, also known as the enlightened witness. This is the ability to receive a person with suspended judgment, right, free of judgment, to greet them with an open and loving heart unconditionally, and to listen most deeply for what it is that they feel, because what it is that they feel tells people, what they want, need, or value, and just being able to reflect that in simplicity, right, and not interpret. So I see a guide as having many of the skills that, let's say, a counselor or a chaplain or things like that might have, as opposed to a sitter who is just there primarily for physical safety. I'm not going to let you go drive, let's say.
And how do people go about finding one is a question we hear all the time.
Well, depending on who you have in your life, informally, organically, you could ask a loved one to sit for you. In terms of finding a guide, that's certainly one of the ways that I, on a very case-by-case basis, work with people. And the way to go about finding is to be in relationship and let yourself be known as a trustworthy human being yourself. Vet whomever it is that you might be making yourself vulnerable with, because you understand, and under the influence of psychedelics, we are very, very vulnerable. I don't know, check your homework. Do your math twice.
Thank you. And so the second part of this question was about Did you have a point on this?
I just wanted to say that I see guide a little differently in that guide suggests that I'm directing a person someplace, and I very much believe in that the medicine and your own internal mechanisms are moved towards health and resolving conflicts. And so my experience, and I think Elizabeth as well, is that our job primarily, whether we're sitting or guiding or whatever you want to call it, is to get out of the way of the relationship between the medicine and the person who's taken it. Both of us, because we've worked in a crisis clinic for 15 plus years, are very capable of taking over and taking control of a difficult situation if somebody's having a hard time. But at least and I'm pretty sure Elizabeth would say this too, mostly our job is to get out of the way and allow things to unfold and keep the physical safety.
So as to the second question, and then we'll go back to the audience, because I saw some folks formulating questions, so didn't lose track of you. What are your thoughts on microdosing? When is it appropriate to use? What are the substances? Am I remembering you correctly?
And what are the benefits? And I do have a follow-up question to that based on what you were just saying. I'm curious to know if it's obviously there are spiritual, emotional, mental benefits, but are there also physiological benefits to heal the body physiologically?
Oh, yes. I would, to your answer about the physiological benefit, I would answer yes, neuroplasticity. Priming the brain to learn, take up new material, lay down new habits, and also to shed and let go of what no longer suits us. It primes the brain for learning and healing. I know that sounds like a grand statement. I don't balk at that, though.
You've seen a number of pretty remarkable experiences that people had with microdosing. I was microdosing for, 6-9 months, something like that. It was wonderful. The primary things that I experienced were that...
Joe, back up. What is it? Give us the 101 and then tell us about the experience.
So part of the problem with taking substances or mushrooms all the time is that they lose their potency for you. You develop tolerance, and so you have to figure out some regimen to take it and not take it, take it and not take it, and there are various ways to do that. Some it's 3 days on, 4 days off. Fadiman, whose book I have over there, has one where it's every third day or every fourth day. you take it. The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. One of the better books if you're looking for general information. I think Pollens is the first you should go to, but the second would be Fadiman's. Thank you. And so he has it you take it one day, 2 days off, and then you take it the third or fourth day. And you can do that depending on who you're listening to, 6 months or a year, somewhere in there. They suggest you then take a break. The medicines, the mushrooms particularly, and the plant medicines in general are pretty safe. Ayahuasca having some problematic issues, ibogaine also. But mushrooms are extremely safe. They just have no physiological. Although, isn't it mushrooms that are supposedly treats cluster headaches? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and I've had people testify to that. My stepdaughter is the only person I've ever heard who had a bad result from taking mushrooms. People sometimes have no result. It just doesn't seem to make a difference to them, or whatever difference it's making is so subtle that they don't notice it. But my stepdaughter took it twice, and each time, weeks apart. The next day, the word she used was despairing. She felt a level of despair that she'd never experienced in her life, and so wisely she said, "I guess this isn't my medicine." But I haven't heard anybody else have a negative response to it. It seems to me that done right, it's a freebie. Try it, see if it works. I just don't know of any real danger with it.
What are some good resources people can do their own homework online for microdosing?
Well, Arrowwood's great for everything.
Elizabeth, I think I saw you wanted to jump in here.
I'm sorry?
Elizabeth wanted to jump in.
Dr. Fadiman again, in the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. If you Google Fadiman, Fadiman, and microdosing, he has gathered several thousand data points of people who have been microdosing and has developed this protocol for dosing a day, taking 2 days off, dosing a day. When we're talking microdosing, we're talking about approximately about a 30th of a trip dose. So if a trip dose, let's say, of dried cubensis is about 3.5 grams, we're talking about 200 milligrams of a microdose every fourth day. So yes, Dr. Fadiman has a great microdosing schedule online that you can read about. It'll walk you through.
Great. Let's go back to... You do your own
Get
work.
a gem scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can buy a gem scale for $40 on Amazon.
Okay, let's go back to the audience.
I was just curious what the advantages of microdosing. Why do people microdose?
Like I said, my experience was that I had a better attitude. My stepdaughter said she could tell when I was microdosing and when I can't. Things bothered me less, and I was more efficient. I procrastinated less. I was able to accomplish more, and just kind of had a general attitude, better attitude. My experience is on the lesser end of things. Elizabeth,
Joe, microphone.
Sure, we've seen very dramatic improvements as the same kind of thing you would have with an antidepressant. You take the amount such that you don't notice anything. You don't get high. It's a really small dose, and take it for a couple, 3 weeks, and see how it's affecting you. I'm committed to not proselytizing for this stuff, but it's hard. It really is hard because it just works. And there's very little.
So Valis wanted to jump in first. So Valis and then Elizabeth.
I was just going to mention, you were asking why do it. One of the reasons I microdose, and I might do just slightly more than a microdose, enough so that I actually do feel the effects. And I like to do that when I go to work, because when I'm developing an AI system, I can use maybe a macro dose to start, but then later on when I'm really putting an AI system together, I and many other people who work in this space do microdose, and we can see the connections that we might not otherwise see, or if we did get there, it would take us much longer.
Elizabeth?
So I appreciate knowing creativity and problem solving is something you've used it for. I have many clients. I myself have used it for creativity and problem solving, but probably the most inspiring has been I have seen quite a few people take on microdosing who have treatment-resistant depression and have tried many modalities and medicines and who've gotten breakthroughs that it's like, as Joe said, it's hard not to proselytize. I've also taken microdosing for my own depression and can report happy benefit.
Joe gets the last word, and then we have a question in the back.
Fadiman's book, I think it was in the 80s or maybe the 90s, he did some legal studies with LSD and creativity, and that book has remarkable stories about scientists and such that reported remarkable changes in what they were able to accomplish.
Okay, our next question's here.
I've had, as you guys were talking about just before, I've done some therapeutic treatments for treatment-resistant depression using MDMA in a therapeutic setting, and was interested in the possibility of microdosing. But in hearing you guys talk, I wasn't sure what drugs you're talking about. Is it? Basically, online, I was really unable to find anything about MDMA in particular as something that people were using to microdose. I saw lots about psilocybin and LSD, but nothing about MDMA. And I'm wondering if you all have any thoughts about it.
I don't know of anybody microdosing MDMA. I know MDMA is not actually a classical psychedelic. It's an empathogen, but it's used in some similar ways. When I am seeing people talk about microdosing, it's primarily psilocybin or LSD, some morning glory seeds.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any MDMA microdosing either, but it occurs to me now that one of the things that problem with that is the A in MDMA stands for amphetamines, and so there's got to be some problems associated with ongoing amphetamine. But I was just thinking that one of the things that MDMA does really well is that it disconnects or significantly lowers the activity of the amygdala, the lizard brain, and that's the sort of source of the fight or flight and source at least of some of our anxiety. And it might be a great anxiolytic, except it's an amphetamine.
Okay, we have a question in the back.
So you guys have been talking about psilocybin a lot, but I was curious if you guys had any insights on LSD in comparison.
Just my personal experience yesterday. It had been 25 years since I had an experience with LSD. Psilocybin has been my medicine for a long time, and LSD doesn't tend to show up as often therapeutically in the clinical research because it just is such a long trip. Many of us just don't have the stamina to go that long and attend someone in an experience. So what is it that you're wondering about LSD and what we might know?
Well, you talked about the safety of psilocybin compared to other drugs, so how does LSD compare?
Well, I know my mycology, and it's easier for other people to pick up their mycology so they know what kind of mushrooms they're ingesting, as opposed to, the higher order knowledge that Valis has around chemistry. How are you going to be sure that you have what you think you have if it's a chemical and not a plant medicine?
You can assay it and determine what you have. There are labs that will test it for you, or you can just do a small bioassay.
Physically, LSD is as harmless as mushrooms. They're both. They basically, neither one of them have a toxic level. It's not. There's an old storyline about an elephant who they gave 10,000 times more than he should have had and died. But even that's apparently not true. So yeah, they're both physically very safe. Obviously, some of the concerns that came out of the 60s of people jumping out of buildings and that kind of stuff is really much more rare than was purported during those times, during the hysteria. What one researcher called the moral hysteria of the 70s. But they're relatively safe drugs if you have good supervision.
Yeah, and I'll just throw some moderator's privilege in there, is that responsible use really matters. And a lot of what was happening in the 60s was irresponsible use. And so the stories of people jumping out of windows and things were people that were not really clear what they were getting into and not being deliberate. So responsible use has a key part in this. We have another question back here.
How does a guided trip, be it ceremonial or clinical, compare to a recreational trip? And do you guys think there's a place for both in someone's practice?
So the question, go ahead. The question was about recreational use?
Yeah, so how does a guided trip differ from recreational use, and is there space for both?
Can you define recreational use?
If I were to take it on a camping trip with my friends or something like that. Out in nature, I don't know.
I think that even if somebody sets out to do something so-called recreationally, it ends up coming back to source and to spirit. If you're out in nature and you're with people you care about, most likely you're going to have a deep connection with that experience. That's different than taking a mixture of substances and drinking a lot of alcohol or suppressing your experience. I see those as different things, alcohol being a depressant.
I think play can be enormously healing. My hope in working with people individually is that we are tailoring it, that I'm listening very much for what sort of an experience they're looking to have. If they want a clinical experience, I understand the Johns Hopkins protocol, and we can set it up just like that. If they're looking for, as Joe used the word psychospiritual, I would use the word existential maybe. Questioning of the universe, your why, that sort of thing, that this is all very tailored. I have had some sits with people where we've blown bubbles, colored, hiked around the woods, and danced to music, and it felt like lots of play and recreation, but that was also what was clinically appropriate for that person as I helped listen to their needs, reflected back for accuracy, and they said, yeah, and I'm like, okay, let's dance and play and blow bubbles in the woods.
Just be safe is all.
Well, I guess to that point, and if I could just kind of read into your question a little bit here, I've got a ticket to the Gorge to see Dead and Company 2 nights in a row and half a sheet, and I'm going to go have fun. What's your advice to that person?
Take a friend.
Use your mic.
Have a designated driver, as it were, somebody who's keeping track of stuff. I did, back in the day, I did psychedelics only for fun, not for spiritual stuff, not for clinical stuff. And yet, as we just said, you're going to have a spiritual experience. You're going to have, as a 24-year-old with 2 other 24-year-olds, I had a little bit of background in reading Indian religion and stuff, but was not in any way, shape, or form a spiritual person. And the 2 people I was with, you couldn't say anything. They couldn't have been further from that if they tried. And yet we all sat on the edge of the Grand Canyon and talked about how there were infinite dimensions and infinite numbers of ways to be alive, and that this one is just one of them. And when we die, we go back into the Great Mother. And, we had a whole theology that we all agreed on, that we all just agreed on, that the medicine gave us. And so, have fun, do it. That's, but I personally don't think you should mix drugs at all, and B, have somebody around who's the designated adult.
Hi there. You guys mentioned briefly about being a guide for some people on trips, that if they started having like a bad time or were being overwhelmed. I was just wondering if you guys could give us some tips about, like, if you are the person that's around that kind of person, then what's the right methodology to follow to help them, or what is the right steps for that, I guess?
Do you want to go? So in the medicine circles I do, we might use a certain plant medicine depending on what it is you're trying to work on. And so in the circle, we would enhance that by increasing your dose and supporting you as you work through that process, which, it might be different depending on what your issues are and which plant you've ingested. So that's how we would do it in a circle. And for clinical use...
If I have agreed to attend to someone while they are taking a medicine, we have done several hours of preparation where we're attending to setting and our rapport. And in that, we have uncovered what resources that person has. Someone I was working with recently, yoga was very much a foundational piece. And then there were also loving family members and friends and people that they had pictures of. And we had done breath work together. We had had some pretty extensive conversations about touch, non-sexual touch, of course. I've been known to ask a person to bring their body back into a symmetrical position and take on a physical position of openness and surrender. We've talked at length that the attitude to bring to the experience is one of surrender or let go. And so coaching a person with that, doing literal breath work with them, sometimes just getting up and changing the scenery. And not persisting, not trying too hard to have a distinct outcome, too. Keeping ourselves psychically supple, if you will.
The other thing I want to add to working with medicines is that it's not all just one thing. So you're not processing something difficult the entire time. It will be, up and down. So you might have some fun and you might do some process work and you might connect with nature. It could be different every time. So I think the main thing is to just keep breathing and stay open and let whatever it is just kind of surface and go into the process with an intention. So what is it you want to get out of that experience?
So one of the things I very much rely on and build on and am very conscious of is the relationship I have with the individual. And we together decide whether there's enough trust that we together can get them through any difficult times that may happen. In general, straighten up, try some deep breathing. And then what is it that's scaring you? What's there? And moving towards it, moving towards the thing that's scary, asking it why it's there. It just seems like it really, it's happened. It worked for me. You move towards it rather than away from it, and it just sort of loses its potency.
Two things here. One, maps.org has good resources, including the Manual of Psychedelic Support. So that and their Zendo project have some good FAQ resources. But something that you had asked, you find yourself with somebody, sitting for somebody that's a friend, and you might be out of your depth. And Joe, this brings up something that we talked about in the meeting a few weeks ago. When should one put themselves in that situation? Can one be overconfident about being a guide for somebody else? What do you need to look into in yourself beyond having done it extensively or not to be that trusted person for another person?
Thank you, Charles. Yes. So one of the things I have to emphasize is that working with people who are very depressed is extremely dangerous. It's not something that non-professionals should do. I mean, you just want to go if you're feeling fine and you want to go hang out at the Red Rocks or whatever. That's fine, But I heard of an individual who, a 21-year-old with no training, who sat for a very depressed 20-year-old, and the session went great. It was wonderful, and a month later, the guy killed himself. And so it's not. I mean, that's the one caveat: is if people are having a difficult time, know that you're out of your league. Know to say, no, I'm not going to do this. There are people that Elizabeth and I would refuse to work with, because the danger is too great and you need to set up, what people need. The fundamental thing is the relationship. So they need to have a follow-up with somebody they trust, who they've, built on for a long time before I'll even consider working with somebody with severe depression. It's crazy. If somebody has suicidal ideation, you throw a psychic hand grenade into their brain and, hope that it works out. Know your limits. Thank you, Charles.
Do we have other audience questions over on this side?
So I'm just learning about all of this very recently, and my question may not apply, but my mom and both of her siblings have Alzheimer's, and I'm really wondering, since this does affect the brain, has there been studies? Is there anything that correlates with that? Or I have a friend whose father has Parkinson's. Have there been studies of prevention or any assistance on those levels?
I did recently read about something, but I can't remember. God. Somebody else talk and let me see if I can figure it out.
I don't know of any. Valis? Specifically, Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, no, I don't, but I do know our working theory of neuroplasticity. I think it's a great hypothesis that it could work, but I don't think we have any data points, not that I know of. What do you know, Valis?
Not much, but I would look at Arrowwood and just do a general search on it. I have read some topical articles about using microdosing for Alzheimer's. They weren't in a clinical setting in any way.
Paul Stamets has been advertising a microdosing stack that is lion's mane, psilocybin, and niacin that he advocates to promote neuroplasticity. But again, it's not in the clinical setting, but it does address some of the areas you're talking about. So you might Google Paul Stamets and niacin psilocybin stack for more on that. But this is a nascent. I guess we can't underscore enough. This is a nascent field of research. This is a newly reopened area.
I'd say, too, if you do find something like that, write to one of us or contact us. We would really like to know that and put it on the radar. Thanks.
And we have a question over here.
Thank you. I was just curious. I just started microdosing myself recently. I was wondering if you guys had any suggestions or had heard of any evidence for like amino acids or vitamins to take on your off days to just kind of help keep things well oiled up there. I mean, I don't know, but just, like 5-HTP or L-lysine, anything like that as far as amino acids or dietary things that people do on their off days to just kind of help keep the brain going while you're also microdosing.
I haven't, but I wish my naturopath colleague was here tonight. That's a fantastic question, and I'm sure other people could speak to that. The Yes, NUNM, thank you. There's a lot of growing interest in that university. People are following the psychedelic research, so I think you could have an informed conversation with some of their more recent graduates on that.
There's also just, what I find useful personally is just metabolic autophagy, just getting into that state. Not every psychedelic behaves the same way, so say 5-MeO-DMT doesn't deplete serotonin levels, but some other compounds might. So it depends on what you're using.
Is anybody using MDMA in their journey work, or and any potential thoughts about combining MDMA with psilocybin for journey work?
It's called hippie flipping, and yeah, people do it quite a bit. The idea being that the MDMA, the crushing of the amygdala, makes the ride on the psilocybin, which can be rough for the first half hour. So you take the MDMA first, and then a little while later you take the psilocybin, and it makes the scarier parts of the psilocybin an easier ride. And then if you're really into it, you finish it off with 5-MeO, 5-HTP.
I was talking about 5-MeO DMT.
Oh, right, no. You take,
but HTP, yeah.
Yeah. So you take something to ease coming off the MDMA, which you sometimes have a physical depletion as well as a psychic depletion at the end of that. It's because, it is an amphetamine.
Well, if you take the HTP too, you will also just remind the serotonin what its job is, and it will keep going.
It seems to be effective, and so yeah, hippie flipping.
In the malaprop there, you did raise a question that we should ask. What are the different DMTs, Valis?
That's my favorite question. The different DMTs, well, there's NN-DMT, and then there's 5-MeO DMT, not to be confused with one another. So one of the biggest differences is, for example, the daime or ayahuasca has as its main component NN-DMT. This is a much more visual, sometimes machine elves show up, all kinds of things can show up visually. There's still a sense of your ego and sense of self with NN-DMT, and I think that's the primary difference. With 5-MeO DMT, there's a complete dissolution of ego, so that's a major difference. Ayahuasca also, if you ingest that, it can be a fast-acting experience if you smoke it, or if you ingest it, a much slow-burning experience. 5-MeO DMT, you would not want to ingest. This is typically encephalated, or you would vaporize it and inhale it, and it's a fast-acting medicine.
Okay, we have a question over here.
So for someone with no experience with psychedelics who's interested in DMT, is that like a crazy place to start? Should you look at psilocybin first? I mean, what's the course of this? Because my interest comes from, I read DMT, the spirit molecule. I'm very interested in that aspect of it. I got involved with that subject just with my experience, or with my interest in near-death experience. So looking at it from more of the spiritual perspective and understanding consciousness better, and does it survive the body, that's kind of where my interest in psychedelics lie. So is there like a path to that where I could experience DMT, but first you got to
try. Are there prerequisites?
Right. Like, I don't want to go overboard and write myself off to ever try anything ever again.
No, you could do that. Just make sure you do it in a safe setting, that the set and setting are set up optimally for you. As I said, NN-DMT and 5-MeO DMT are very different experiences. It's a different molecule. Just be clear about what it is you're getting. And if someone tells you they've made this in their bathtub, wrong answer.
And if they don't know, wrong answer.
Yeah. Be careful. It's your brain, and these are highly tuned medications you're talking about. Highly tuned medicines.
And there are testing resources that folks can find. Can somebody on the stage speak to some of the ways that one can test what they have to be safe?
Well, there's DanceSafe, and I don't know whether they're testing actively now or not. Are they? They got in trouble and they got their wrists slapped, and so they sort of backed off a little bit on what they're doing.
But there are kits that one can locate. So there's some. If somebody can speak to that, and if not, I would just suggest that you can do some independent research and test what you have. And this is an important thing to do before entering something into your body.
I had a client who swore that he made DMT from a YouTube video.
Mm-hmm. No, he did not.
Okay.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a little bit more about ayahuasca. I've been interested in kind of doing some research, and as you may well know, it seems like the vast majority of venues that basically deal are in South America, Peru in particular. With all these, it's become quite an industry down there, and it's kind of daunting. So my first question is how, this has been touched on before, but how are there criteria that you use if you're seeking out, say an ayahuasca experience with a so-called shaman, particularly out of country where it seems like it might be fraught with a lot more uncertainty and disappointment? Also, you spoke of the two different types of DMT. Are they both different types of ayahuasca? I know one of them is ayahuasca, essentially, right?
NN-DMT would represent ayahuasca. 5-MeO-DMT is a different molecule altogether. And no, 5-MeO-DMT is 5-MeO-DMT. DMT typically refers to NN-DMT. It's a tryptamine. Both of them are a tryptamine. So if you're looking for someone in South America, for example, you have found the others here, and I would just come to these events, talk to people, just start talking to people, attend events. I'm guessing quite a few people here have made those journeys. And get a referral. Don't just go online and pick something and wander down to Peru. Just find somebody who knows what you're getting into.
If you meet me after the session, I just read about a website that reviews all of or many of the programs down there, and hopefully I can find that it's in one of the books I have here. So give us a few minutes, and there is a place that reviews them, and there is information out there. You have to look for it.
It's ayahuasca tourism.
Yeah.
I didn't realize there was a website. You have to tell me what it is.
Yeah. My friend recently did that, and she had to do basic research, but it's out there. People have died down there, and there's a lot of sexual abuse that's happening down there as well. But there's plenty of really good people too.
Does that answer your question?
Come see me afterwards.
Okay.
I have a real nitty-gritty question. How much is reasonable to expect to pay for a guide? What's the range?
Mike, use your mic.
You can also make arrangements to trade with someone, not on the same day, but you could, say, just exchange time, sitting time. Does that help? Then it doesn't cost anything.
And I'm extremely flexible about payment schedules and stuff. I assume you are also.
Yes.
Okay, we have a question down front.
This is a follow-up question to the woman who spoke about microdosing, and she asked about recovery supplements, amino acids, that sort of thing. My question is, why would you need recovery supplements? Are you worn out after microdosing, or why would you need to consider that in the first place?
So the idea, as I understand it, is that on the day that you take it, you definitely feel the effect of the mushrooms. And the next day, you have an afterglow. And the third day, you're back to normal. And that's mostly so you don't develop tolerance. it gives me energy. It's not exhausting in any kind of way that I'm aware of.
Are there other questions out here? Yes.
I was just going to speak to that because I asked that question just a little bit more. I think I'm just new to it and wanted to make sure that because there are things happening in my brain, that if there were ways to help that repair itself or whatever, I was just asking based on the fact that there's a cadence of some sort of chemical affecting my brain. So I'm curious if there's any other ways to kind of balance out those effects, but not that I heard anything or know of anything. It was just kind of my own curiosity. This might be another after the session question, but just looking to get more reputable or getting referenced reputable places to buy mushrooms to grow yourself at home. So online, I know there's some, but I don't want to just kind of blindly. So I was just curious if anyone up there had experience with some of the online stores, if they could refer them.
I have none. I've heard good things about them is all. I haven't heard horror stories at all.
It should be noted that the spores are not illegal. Buying the spores is not illegal, but the possession is still Schedule 1. So just be informed by that.
I happen to know where to get some of those. So mushrooms.com or shrooms.com, both of those companies sell a variety of syringes with the spores. Again, they're for research purposes, completely legal. You can transact that through PayPal or a credit card. It will come right to your house. It's when you ingest them that they become illegal. So for the purpose of this conversation, let's just assume you're going to do research. You can choose from many different spores. They review them for you. They come in a syringe ready to inject into the substrate of your choice, which you can also purchase in these little blocks that, as someone lovingly told me, they were idiot-proof. And I haven't tried them yet, but it has a little port in it. You can just inject the spores into it, and apparently they grow.
I've been told, I haven't done any of this, but I've been told that there is some hit and miss with it, that keeping sterile is really important and difficult, and that you may have some failures, but it's relatively easy.
We're starting to run. Go ahead.
No, just watch the Portland Psychedelic Society meetup group every now and then. We have a workshop in how to prepare them.
We're starting to run into our last 10, 15 minutes. So are there questions from anybody we haven't heard from yet? Okay, there's a duplicate back here, so here you go.
I think it was Valis that mentioned having like a medicine card to participate in your ceremonies. Is that something, like, how would someone get one of those?
Well, if you come to one of my ceremonies, I'll provide a letter that says you're a person who I would recommend get a medicine card from the Native American Church, and then you would go online and fill out a really basic application and send in a photograph, and you are then sent a card that says you are now a member of the Native American Church.
Are there other questions? Is there anybody we haven't heard from? Is there anybody who's got a question that they... Here we go.
I'm actually just curious because the Renaissance has been happening, but the research is limited. Do you know, or this seems like the horizon is kind of limitless. Are there people that are, I'm just out of curiosity, not for trying to seek it, but just, are there people that are really pushing the limit right now, anecdotally, for different sorts of treatments, or, somebody mentioned Alzheimer's and things like that. It's just, it seems like the potential is so huge, and you're discussing neuroplasticity that, do you know anything about that? Not in terms of specifics, but just like, are there fearless people doing that kind of work?
Go to Arrowwood. Arrowwood is filled with people who are doing the most amazing things, both responsible research and also wildly irresponsible behavior. And that's always true. I mean, that's just the human race is like that. And there's people doing the most bizarre stuff. I mean, the trouble is that it's still very hard to get money and to get permission to use these substances. It is happening. It's happening more than it was 10 years ago. It's blossoming, but legitimate legal research is still relatively limited.
One of the more gonzo projects going on right now is the DMTX project. Does anybody? You must know about that. Do you want to speak to that?
Are you referring to the brain scans at Johns Hopkins?
No, the DMTX is extended state DMT using an intravenous drip to attempt to create basically people staying in the space for hours on end.
I'm not.
It's NN, not 5-MeO.
Yes, I'm not that familiar with NN. I don't use it that.
Mm-hmm. So that's one to your example. But go ahead, Valis.
Well, I was just thinking about. There's a Johns Hopkins study that is geared toward 5-MeO DMT, and they're taking people who present with that medicine in a very still way rather than presenting in a way where you're moving around a lot. So they can do magnetic resonance on the brain and just show slice by slice what's happening there. So that's currently underway.
Are there other questions out here? Yeah, in the back.
Does anyone have experience with Salvia Divinorum?
I sat for someone once on Salvia Divinorum, and it was only once, and it will only ever be once. And this was 10 years into me being a crisis worker, and I'm like, oh, there's my limit. It came on so fast, was so disorienting. I was so glad it was over so fast. It was for a dear friend of mine. This was not a professional thing that I did. This was a friend of mine who was like, hey, I've got some salvia. I want to do it. And I'm like, I'm going to keep an eye on you. I'm really glad I was there, and yet I don't ever want to repeat that process.
Was it smoked, or was it the...
It was smoked.
So there's two ways to do Salvia Divinorum. There's the smoke method, and then there's also, if you have the fresh leaves, the kind of chew method as well.
And my son also scared his pants off himself by doing salvia. Came home with his tail between his legs and said, Mommy, you were right. I shouldn't. I'm like, mm-hmm.
It may be legal, but it's very powerful. Other questions?
It's really powerful, and apparently you're in some physical danger of just hurting yourself from thrashing around. You definitely need at least one sitter, maybe two.
As I understand it, if you chew the quid, it comes on in a much more manageable fashion. This one time I attended someone, it was like 10 times the strength, and she did combust it. And I don't recommend that because of how quickly it sets in.
Is there a question here? Are there other questions out here? Yeah.
So there's salvia and some cactuses we can buy locally here that are legal psychedelics. Are there any other legal psychedelics? And should we be talking more about what we can actually just get our hands on and do rather than some of these more well-known names that are scheduled ones?
Well, there's holotropic breathing. I mean, it's not even a substance, but I get varying reports. Some people report it's quite effective, and others are not as impressed. I've never tried it. I have COPD, so it's not something I'm going to play with.
I've trained in holotropic breathing, and I think it's a fascinating tool. There's also a person just starting a business here in Portland who's using a Lucia light, Lucia. It's a light that is stroby, and she dials it in, and you have a very visually psychedelic experience, and sometimes even kind of ego-existentially psychedelic experience. So, and not illegal.
There are lots of substances. Everything is a chemical, right? So many things are still legal and have never been illegal. The thing I would be concerned about is making sure that there is no level or a low level of liver toxicity. So Arrowwood, or just do the research first, but lots of different things.
We have time for one or two more audience questions. Are there any audience questions that have not been asked yet? Anybody with anything burning inside? Okay, I'm going to ask one, and then we'll go back and give the audience one last chance. We haven't talked about the fact that these things are weird. So why don't you describe some of the novel states that you've experienced?
I experienced myself as probably a 90-year-old person several trips ago. Like, literally, I looked at myself and I could see myself as an old woman, and it was not disconcerting, but it sure was trippy, man. Sure was weird. I was sure kind of glad to be back in my not 90-year-old body.
My most unique experience goes back 50 years. With those two other individuals I mentioned earlier, we were tripping on the edge of the Grand Canyon. And we started having group trips, group hallucinations. We saw the same things. And it wasn't like, do you see that 10-foot butterfly over there? It was like, look over there. What do you see? And everybody was experiencing the same hallucinations repeatedly. And that went on through the night. And that's left me to this day with that question of, it's one thing to have your brain change such that you're having different stimuli is affecting you differently. It's another thing when it just doesn't seem possible that you would have the same hallucinations. To this day, I wonder whether, and I know people who believe that this is true, whether there isn't a place, an actual physical place, that you go to a different dimension or something, because I have no explanation for why you would all have the same hallucinations.
Valis?
How much time do we have? Okay. I'm pretty sure I'm not really here anyway, so... whenever you talk about, is there another place, there are so many places, and it begs the question, who is the you that you think is somewhere?
Oh, God. We're gonna drop down that rabbit hole, are we?
It is the Psychedelic Society, after all.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we have one last audience question I'm going to get to over here.
Curious what your least favorite things about being a guide are, and maybe what your favorite.
The least favorite thing about being a guide. It is pretty physically demanding sometimes. I definitely go pretty much straight from a sit to into self-care for my body. And my most favorite thing is, as always, getting front row seats as people find their why in life, and that's trip related or not trip related.
Done right, it's hard work, is what I think. I've watched me change what I was thinking, and it affect the person I was sitting with. The smallest thing, you're connected in a particular way during that process. You're trying to hold a container that this person can experience the sacred and the spiritual and the psychiatric if you want to go there. But it's hard work. I just sat for a couple, and they did it. We did it 2 different times for each one, and both of them were impressed of how intensely I was in the process, and it's exhausting. 2 days of doing that, and I needed about 4 days to recover. But that's also the best part of it too. Is, as she said, you have a front row seat, and you're right there with them, and that you're experiencing, you definitely get a contact high. There's no question about it.
Valis, I'm going to flip this question to you. What's the best thing about leading ceremony and the worst thing about leading ceremony?
The best thing, I think creating a tribe, creating a circle with other people, and the types of interdimensionality you can experience with those folks. The worst thing is not having one every day.
So speaking of leading the tribe, we are all in this together, and the Psychedelic Society depends on you coming out and being a part of these events and bringing your questions, and if you're so called, volunteering for us. So, Valis, how can people become a more involved part of our tribe?
Well, soon we're going to have a website. We also have some a volunteer coordinator, 2 of them, a volunteer chair. I don't think Heidi is here tonight, but we have those things, and you can look on Meetup. Our website is going to come back up pretty soon. We have a conference coming up in October, and we haven't announced it yet, but Charles might have something to add about that.
Well, you'll be the first to know, but it's going to be happening in October at Revolution Hall. We have some real visionary psychonauts, some of whom have books on that table. So people that have really made an impact on the field are going to be coming here to Portland, because all of us here tonight are part of a community that is changing things for the better. So thank you all for being a part of it.
Charles, could I just said one other thing I think you can do is talk to other people about your interest. Twice in the last week, I've had an experience of I mention LSD, and people. One of my daughter's coworkers said, "Oh yeah, I've been sitting for people." You know, when I told them what I did for a living, she said, "Yeah, that's what I did too." And my phlebotomist, I was getting my blood drawn and made some joke about drugs and about LSD. He says, "Oh yeah, LSD is a great drug. Yeah, my father used to make it down in the basement during the 60s." He said this. He said, and he was the one who drove Leary up to Canada after he broke out of jail. Wow. So there are people everywhere. Your phlebotomist is probably an old hippie, who has an experience with it. As part of this renaissance, I think we need to be acknowledging that we have interests and concerns, and that this is going on. And I just encourage you to talk more about it with whoever is around, and I think you'll find some amazing connections.
Hear, hear. So we're going to be up front for about another 10 minutes. Please talk to your neighbors. Please come talk to us. If you're so moved to support, we have T-shirts that are available for $20 donation. We have meetup.com where you can go to future events. We have a YouTube channel that Jason here has put all of our past talks up, and there's some incredible stuff. Paul Stamets, Dennis McKenna, a whole bunch of really great folks. In fact, let's give Jason a big round of applause, because he is keeping this alive online and does an amazing job. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Hope to see you at an upcoming group. Yeah. And those that want to continue the conversation, some of us will be going over to Dots across the street, so feel compelled to join us if you'd like, and talk to y'all soon. Thanks.